Well, I spend almost my entire day on that question. I think it's a very difficult question to answer because the traditional relationship between story and press doesn't apply here for a number of reasons. First of all, it's useful to think of Trump as a competing media organization to the media organizations.
Right.
So it's not just a story to cover. He's actually trying to take away your audience, take away the cultural space.
Trying to disintermediate
that media, that media once occupied. And you could see that in the way that he became, like during the campaign, a ratings powerhouse. Mm-hmm. What that did was make him a more successful producer of what's on NBC than the journalists at NBC. Mm-hmm. That's why he called into 5 shows. That's why they had the camera waiting for him to come on stage, right? Because as a media company, he was more successful than media companies. Another weird thing, a very difficult thing about covering Trump is that in an interview situation, normally in an interview situation, you're trying to get at some reality that is beyond the interview, right? The policy, mm-hmm. the intention, what he plans to do in his foreign policy. With Trump, an interview situation isn't like that at all. He's just trying to use that media event to boast about himself and to set off some spectacular narcissistic bomb, right, that will produce more attention. And so the whole idea that you're interviewing him to get at a reality that is not the interview doesn't actually work.
Well, so, this is why there was so much attention on that Michael Schmidt interview, where he didn't push back on certain things, and there's a big debate about
right. And it's so much bigger than you didn't ask him enough tough questions. So how are they doing? I think Donald Trump breaks every routine of political journalism that existed before he became president. Mm-hmm. And that requires the press to go back and sift through the wreckage and decide which of those routines still works and then invent new ones. And I don't think our press is very good at doing that on the job, on the fly, when it has this big story to cover.
Mm-hmm. So we've got sort of Facebook on the one side, Trump on the other. The news media or journalists kind of stuck somewhere in between. This is a question for anybody, but Nuala, I'd be interested to hear what you think about where do legislators and regulators sort of fit if the media aren't great at solving these kinds of questions. What's Washington's role?
We're here from the government. We're here to help. It's the worst thing you want to say,
well, we're just back in business now today. They're open up.
Well, that's good news, I suppose. If you ask that question in Europe, they will say, absolutely, we need to regulate all of these big platforms on a lot of different speech grounds, and that's a really hot issue. I would urge, I guess, a little bit of caution in thinking the government is going to be able to solve, again, for truth. A ministry of truth is a kind of frightening idea in this in this environment, in this administration. But I do think there is both a regulatory history and possibly a regulatory future. I'm really curious about how much the fairness doctrine really plays into this and the demise of kind of a central media kind of regime that allows for different viewpoints. And that's some of the testing I know Facebook and other platforms have done, is forcing you to see things that are alternative viewpoints. Some of the research we've seen in the Knight Commission work on trust media and democracy is how the filter bubbles really do separate people, and the kind of red journalists and red, I mean Republican leaning, and populations and viewers and readers kind of increasingly are on one side, and kind of left-leaning viewers, readers, and institutions increasingly separate. And fascinating, we saw some fascinating research on Twitter that showed the Sanders people actually kind of looping around in this weird circle around both sides. But you do worry about people seeing more of what they agree with, and whether or not there is no more shared central repository of information, truth, and kind of reality for American citizens.
I'll tell you something people in Washington need to start doing. There are a lot of people in this town who teach their constituents, their supporters, their audience, that you can't trust what's in the Washington Post and what's on CNN and New York Times. And they start their day by reading the Washington Post.
Right.
That hypocrisy, which is what it is, and lying to your own people, that has to stop.